What is going on, guys? Today I'm coming at you with another EDH deck tech. Today we're going to be looking at Beledros Witherbloom. This is an extremely powerful Elder Dragon from the new Strixhaven set. So it is a Golgari dragon that costs 7. It is a 4/4 flying Elder Dragon. At the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with, when this creature dies, you gain 1 life. And then it also says pay 10 life to untap all lands you control, activate only once each turn. So there's a lot of things going on here. It's a 4/4 flyer for 7, which is okay, but generating 1/1 pests, so 1/1 tokens on each player's upkeep, as well as being able to untap your lands each turn, is absolutely massive. So there's a couple of different ways you can build this deck, but I've chosen to focus mainly around the first ability, so building an aristocrats token sacrifice deck, with a couple of ways of abusing this pay 10 life to untap all your lands. So very powerful commander, and let's jump into how we are going to build this as an aristocrat style strategy. For those of you who don't know, an aristocrat style strategy is a strategy where you generate a lot of tokens and you gain value by sacrificing your creatures and sacrificing your tokens to generate mana or drain people's life. And Beledros' first ability, the creating a pest at each upkeep, fits into that style of strategy. In this type of strategy, the first thing that we want to be able to do is to generate tokens. So in black and green, there's quite a lot of reanimation. So having creatures that generate tokens is quite powerful, because if we can reanimate it from the graveyard, when it enters, we are going to recreate all those tokens. So then we can get into these loops where we can play a creature that generates tons of tokens and sacrifice it and reanimate it to get more tokens, and then we're sacrificing these tokens to eventually get so much value we overwhelm our opponents. So the first category that we're going to look at is token generation. So Beledros does that very well by himself, but we need other things in the deck that support that and do similar things just to bolster him up. So the first one is Valentin, Dean of the Vein. It's a 1/1 menace lifelink for 1. And if a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. So it kind of taxes your opponents by exiling their creatures. And then when you do, you may pay to make a pest. So it makes a pest, which is pretty good, and it's an early drop. Another thing that makes it very good is that this card is an MDFC. So on the other side of the card, we have Lizette, Dean of the Root, a 4-cost 4/4. Whenever you gain life, which we will be doing because we are making pests that gain us life when we sacrifice them, put a +1/+1. You may pay 1. If you do, put a +1/+1 count on each creature you control, and they gain trample. So this is a very good way of just buffing all our creatures and ending the game. A couple of other good options for create token generation is Izoni Thousandad, which makes tokens for each creature in our graveyard, and it also provides a way for us to sacrifice creatures to draw. Grave Titan, which creates 2/2/2s whenever it enters or attacks. Nadir, Agent of Duskanel, is a 6-cost 3/3 that gets +1/+1 counters when tokens we control leave. So we are going to have a lot of tokens leaving because we are sacrificing them for value anyway, which will grow Nadir, and when Nadir leaves, which we can do at will because we are playing sacrifice already, we can just generate insane amounts of tokens. So very strong. Hornet Queen is also good, 7-cost 2/2 flying Death Touch, and when it enters, we make 4 1/1 green insect creature tokens with flying and Death Touch. So another body that can create multiple tokens. And then in terms of non-creature ways of generating tokens, I've gone with Tend the Pests, which is an additional cost. We have to sacrifice a creature, and then we create X 1 black and green pest creature tokens, where X is the sacrificed creature's power. So we can sacrifice a large power creature in order to make a ton of tokens. And then Sazat's Will, which is very strong. It exiles each opponent's graveyard, and then we make tokens equal to the greatest power creature that was exiled, as well as a bit of removal as well, forcing our opponents to sacrifice. So also quite a strong card in here. So once we've got our token generating cards, we are now able to generate tokens as we are playing through the game, and then we have to be able to sacrifice those tokens in the strategy to be able to get value. So sacrifice outlets in this deck are extremely important, and free ones are especially important at that, because we don't want to have to pay mana every time we want to sacrifice a creature. So we are going to move on to sacrifice outlets. So the first one, which is an easy include, one of the best black sacrifice outlets, Viscera, a 1-cost 1/1 with sacrifice a creature to scry 1. So very strong that we can do it at instant speed and manipulate the top of the deck, auto include. Yeheni Undying Partisan is a 3-cost 2/2 haste. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, it gets a +1/+1 counter, and then we can sacrifice a creature to give it indestructible till end of turn. So it's a sacrifice outlet that can grow because it's a creature, and it can protect itself by sacrificing other creatures, so it's very powerful. It's a sacrifice outlet that can stick around. Dimmer Houseguard, I love. It's a 4-cost 2/3 fear with sacrifice a creature to regenerate Dimmer Houseguard. So it's quite expensive for a sack outlet, but it has transmute, so you can pay 3 and discard it to find any 4-cost in our deck. So very flexible. Another one which is excellent is Phyrexian Plague Lord. It's a 5-cost 4/4 that we can sacrifice a creature to it to give a target creature -1/-1 until end of turn. So we can use this and all of our tokens to start removing key cards, key creatures on our opponent's boards, as well as being able to tap and sacrifice itself to do -4/-4 on a creature. So it's very strong when fighting indestructible creatures. Dina Soulsteeper, this is not a free sack outlet, but in this deck we are going to be continually gaining small amounts of life because of token sacrifices and pest sacrifices. So having a sacrifice outlet that costs 1 on a creature that is going to amplify our aristocrat payoffs is very powerful. Priest of the Forgotten Gods, although it is not a sacrifice outlet, it allows us to sacrifice creatures for a ton of value. And then Attrition is an absolute house. It's a 3-cost enchantment, pay a black and sacrifice a creature to destroy target non-black creatures. So it can effectively turn all our tokens into creature removal. So we now have ways of generating tokens, and we also have ways of sacrificing these tokens. Sometimes for value and sometimes just to sacrifice them. So we need ways in order for these sacrifices to generate us value. And the best way of doing that is to deal damage and drain life from opponents. So we're going to move from sacrifice outlets to sacrifice payoffs. So the first card, which is an obvious include, is Blood Artist. It's a 2-cost 0/1. Whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So this is going to benefit us by draining opponents when our creatures die, and we'll gain life, which will let us use Beledros' second ability more often, which is the pay 10 life to untap all your lands. So we've got a lot of effects like this in the deck. Blood Artist is the first one. We're also playing Zulaport Cutthroat, which drains each opponent. We have Nadia's Nightblade, which drains opponents when tokens leave, and we are going to have plenty of tokens. Also Bastion of Remembrance, which makes a 1/1 when it enters. It's an enchantment, so it's more difficult to remove, which is a big upside, and it drains opponents when our creatures die. Pitiless Plunderer is an absolute bomb card. Whenever another creature we control dies, we get a treasure. So our creatures dying nets us mana, which is absolutely massive. So with Belladros' second ability and this with a lot of things to sacrifice, we can have absolutely wildly explosive turns. And then the last one is Butcher of Malakir. Dictate of Erebos is slightly better. However, this is more easy to recur. So I've gone with the Butcher of Malakir. Whenever this or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. So it makes our sacrificing, it forces our sacrificing onto opponents as well, which is very strong. It can really mess them up. So these cards are mainly for sacrifice payoffs, but because we have quite a bit of life gain in the deck because of pests and sacrificing and draining, gaining life is actually not to be underestimated in this deck. So there are a couple more life gain payoff cards that actually work extremely well in the deck. Dina Soul Steeper, which we've seen already, is one of them with a sack outlet attached, but a couple of other cards that fit in this category very well are Veto Thorn of Dusk Rose. Veto says whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life, so it turns all of our life gain, incremental or large some life gains, into draining opponents of our choice. So this can be absolutely massive, especially when we aren't just draining with the aristocrats effects. If we use cards like Grey Merchant of Asphodel, which is a 5-cost 2/4, when it enters, each opponent loses X life, where X is your devotion to black. You gain life equal to the life lost this way. So this is a mass drain card that with Veto can be absolutely dirty, especially if we want to sacrifice this and then repeatedly recur it. You can see that we can get insane amounts of damage and life gain off in a single turn. And the last one, which fits these very well, is Verdant Sun's Avatar. It's a 7-cost 5/5. When Verdant Sun's Avatar or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. So every single token we generate is going to give us 1 life, and then we can then sacrifice it to drain people, which will then trigger Veto and Dina and all these aristocrats things. So you can see it can start to snowball ridiculously out of control when you have some of these key pieces in play. So we've gone over generating tokens and then being able to sacrifice those tokens and then sacrificing them for value with additional life gain synergies involved. Card draw is absolutely essential. So the next section we'll be looking at is card draw that synergizes with this style strategy we are going for anyway. And the best card in that category has got to be Skull Clamp. It's an equipment that just we can pay 1 mana to equip it to a 1/1 token. It will die because of this -1, clamping it, and then we get to draw 2. So it will not only be destroying our creatures, which will trigger all of our beneficial effects, but it's also going to be 1 mana draw 2 in most situations. Absolutely fantastic. Another great one is Village Rites. It costs 1 and an instant. As an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a creature to draw 2. You can do this whenever for 1 mana to draw 2. Also very strong. Plumb the Forbidden, which is a new card from Strixhaven, which is similar to Village Rites, but it costs 2 and it's an instant, and you can sack any number of creatures when you cast this, and it copies for each creature you sacrificed as you cast it, and you draw a card and lose a life for each copy. So very strong. We can sacrifice a bunch of creatures, get a bunch of triggers, and draw a lot of cards. Another good draw spell in black is Night's Whisper. Draw 2, lose 2 life. Similarly, we have Sign in Blood, which is target player draws 2 and loses 2 life. And then Liliana's Standard Bearer fits perfectly into this deck. It's a 3-cost 3/1 with flash, and when it enters, draw X cards, where X is the number of creatures that died under your control this turn. So once we have tons of tokens, this, after we sacrifice a ton of tokens, this can just draw us insane amounts of cards. And we can hold this because it has flash, we can hold it defensively. So if someone wants to clear the board and we have tons of creatures, we can just flash this at the end of that turn to draw an insane amount of cards, and we'll definitely be able to recover. Path of Discovery, although is not card draw, does let us search through our library, and it gets lands into our hand. So it can provide us with a lot of value as the game goes on, because we are making tokens with Beledros on each upkeep, and we have tons of ways of generating tokens. So each token will explore, and getting things into our graveyard can be beneficial. It also lets us dig for answers. It's just an all-round great card when we are making a lot of tokens. Probably the second best draw spell in the deck is Moldavine Reclamation. Skull Clamp I think is the best because it's just so cheap to do, but this is a 5-cost enchantment. Whenever a creature you control dies, you gain a life and draw a card. So once you pay the 5, you can just start going ham and drawing tons of cards. Because there's no additional costs after that. So also absolutely fantastic. And then a great one as well as Shamanic Revelation, which draws a card for each creature we control, and we trigger Ferocious with all our power 4 or greater creatures to gain 4 life for each. So it can be massive life gain and an incredible amount of draw. So also absolutely insane. So these card draw cards synergize very well with the deck, but we're also in black and green, and with the creatures and cards we've decided to include here, we also need to run some recursion interaction with our graveyard. So there's a couple of cards which go very nicely in this deck. Both Regrowth and Eternal Witness can fetch any card we want out of our graveyard. Eternal Witness being on a creature is better because it's more flexible, we can recur it easier, but both are just solid includes. Animate Dead is an absolutely insanely strong card. It's 2 mana enchantment to resurrect a creature. This is very strong, and cards like this, another one is Victimize. Pay 3, choose 2 target creatures in your graveyard, sacrifice a creature. If you do, return the chosen cards to the battlefield tapped. Another double resurrection spell, as well as Ever After, which is 6 cost to return up to 2 target creatures from your graveyard to the battlefield. Each of those is a black zombie in addition to its other colors and types, and then you put this on the bottom of your library. These 3 cards are very strong with Belladros, because once we have Belladros out and we pay the 10 life to untap our lands, we can then most likely sacrifice Belladros, which sends him to the graveyard, and then we use this extra mana we now have access to because we've paid the life to untap lands to then resurrect Belladros because we let him hit the graveyard. Then when he comes back, he's a different object, so we can pay 10 life again to untap the lands again. So we can get into this like cycle where we can just pay 10 life, get tons of mana, sack him, resurrect him, pay 10 life, and we can just snowball into tons of mana and insanely explosive plays. Another recursion spell which I think is absolutely incredible in this deck is Command the Dreadhorde, which is a 6 cost sorcery that can resurrect any number of creatures and planeswalkers in all graveyards, but then you take damage equal to the total combined cost of those cards. So it can be quite detrimental because we are paying tons of life already in the deck. We do have a bunch of life gain, but there's a card I'll get to in a bit which is very sneaky and combos very nicely with cards like this. I've also chosen to include a few board clears and removal options. The first being Fleshbag Marauder and Plaguecrafter and Shriekmaw. These 3 creatures are just absolutely fantastic. When they enter, we have to sacrifice a creature, so we can sacrifice one of our tokens or itself and then recur it. There's just plenty of situations where these cards are great. Also, in terms of board clears, I've gone for Necrotic Hex and Decree of Pain. Necrotic Hex says each player sacrifices 6 creatures and you create 6 tapped 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. So it can allow us to sacrifice a ton of creatures, which we want to do anyway, and make a bunch of tokens to replace it. And our opponents do not want to sacrifice that many. And Decree of Pain, we can either cycle it, or if we pay 8 to destroy all creatures, we are going to draw insane amounts of cards with this card. Another card which I highly recommend, which I haven't got here, is a Reclamation Sage, which is a 3 cost 2/1 elf that when it enters you destroy an artifact or enchantment. I highly recommend that. I just have not included it in this list so far. A couple of other utility cards which I think are very beneficial in the deck is Sporefrog, because we are paying lots of life, so we might end up on very low life totals for some rounds, so being able to prevent all combat damage on a creature is very strong. Heroic Intervention is another very strong card which can give all our permanents hexproof and indestructible till end of turn, so we can protect our board state. In terms of tutors, we are going for Varagoth Bloodsky Sire, which can tutor multiple times, very strong card. Sidisi Undead Vizier, which can exploit, so it's a way of sacrificing a creature in order to tutor a card to our hand, very powerful. Worldly Tutor is insanely strong, quite pricey, so it's not an essential include, but it's a very strong card. And then Finale of Devastation is one of the ways this deck wins. We can generate tons of mana and tons of creatures, so being able to pump 10 or more mana into this to give all our creatures a massive buff and haste can be game ending. And then the next 2 cards I thought were quite troll and funny includes. but they work very well in here and they work very well together, and that is World Shaper and Peer into the Abyss. So Peer into the Abyss is a 7-cost sorcery. We usually target ourselves, which is target player draws cards equal to half the number of cards in their library and loses half their life, round up each time. So we'll draw half our deck and lose half our life. And then if we cast a World Shaper, which when it attacks we mill 3, when it dies we put all land cards from your graveyard on the battlefield tapped. So if we can Peer into the Abyss and then cast a World Shaper, after our discard we discard all the lands we drew and didn't want. We can then sacrifice the World Shaper to bring all of those lands that we discarded into play tapped. And then Beledros' untap ability becomes absolutely ridiculous. So yeah. And then the last two tech cards, which I thought were also crazy strong in this deck, almost essential, is Beledros Citadel, which lets us play cards from the top of our library by paying life, and then Profane Transfusion, which I've had much success with. It's a 9-cost, so very expensive, but it says 2 target players exchange life totals. You create an XX colorless horror artifact creature token, where X is the difference between those players' life totals. So I've had it in a game where I used Beledros' ability and Beledros' Citadel and drained so much of my own life that I went to 3 health, played Profane Transfusion to swap with someone, got a massive artifact, and then the following turn drained all my life again to 3, and then recollected this and recast it to swap someone else to 3. So there's just insane things you can do with these life gain and life change and aristocrat strategies all mingled, and the deck can just pop off, and it's crazy. The last section I'd like to cover is ramp. It's absolutely essential that we've got good ramp options in this deck, because we want to ramp very hard into Belladros so we can start paying life to get double value off our lands. Sol Ring is an obvious include. This goes in every commander deck without even, there's no need to even mention it. It's just absolutely outrageously strong. Arcane Signet, also another almost include in every deck. 2-cost artifact ramp. Golgari Signet, the signets are just great, solid ramp cards. So we've got the one that fits in these colors in here. Rampant Growth, just 2 cost to get a land. Farseek, 2 cost to get a swamp. It's okay, but it's not bad. Kodama's Reach and Cultivate, basically identical, but they get us 2 lands, so that's very, very strong. And then Skyshroud Claim, which is a personal favorite of mine. It's a 4-cost sorcery that gets 2 forests in untapped, so that we can then use those 2 forests to cast something else in the same turn after ramping. Very strong. And then we've got a Black Market, which fits in this deck very well, because whenever a creature dies, it gets a charge counter. And then we get black mana at the beginning of our pre-combat main phase for each charge counter on it. So if we get this out and sacrifice a bunch of creatures, on our next turn we are going to get black mana for each creature that died while it is in play. And then Dark Ritual, everyone knows that this is a great card, but I've had particularly a lot of success with it in this deck, because Dark Ritualing to get early Belladros out is almost game breaking, because then we can pay 10 life to untap and ramp out even more things that same turn. So this is absolutely essential, and that's it for the ramp. Right, in terms of lands, we are playing a Malakir Rebirth, which is an MDFC, so it's a land on the other side. We can cast this on Belladros before we sacrifice it, and then it'll return it Belladros to the graveyard, so we can activate again. So this is just basically the best land in the deck, even though it's not actually a land. I haven't got it consuming a land slot in the deck. It consumes a instant slot, but it's just absolutely insane. We are also then playing Memorial to Folly, gives us some recursion. Grim Backwards gives us some sacrifice. Mosswort Bridge lets us dig, which is very nice, because we'll easily meet this requirement of power 10 or more to get the card, because we are making so many creatures. Command Tower is staple. Exotic Orchid, debatable. Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, turns all lands into swamps, so all our colorless lands can then tap for black, which is a bonus. And we have a lot of things with high black devotion in the deck, so this can help us fix those so we can get them out on curve. And then Golgari, Rot Farm, and Temple of the False God are very strong in this deck, because if we play them on 5 mana, if we play Temple of the False God on 5 mana, we can get Belladros out immediately for an activation. And both of these then, with Belladros' ability, net us an additional 2. So they're very beneficial to play with Belladros' ability. Blighted Woodland is a ramp land. Evolving Wilds just to fix. Bajuka Bog enters tapped and it exiles all cards from target opponent's graveyard, so very strong grave hate. We got a Temple of Malady to scry and manipulate the top in case we hit a dud on the Bolas Citadel. Barren Moor, similar. Emergence Zone lets us flash, so this land can set us up for a big play late in the game. Drownyard Temple, which we can just return if we end up milling it. And then Radiant Fountain for some life gain. And then the rest of the deck, we've just got basic swamps and forests. I hope you guys enjoyed this Aristocrats deck tech of Beledros Witherbloom. I have had a ton of fun testing and playing this deck. I hope that you enjoy the vid and think about building your own Belladros deck, and let me know if you'll be building aristocrats or a different type of life drain strategy. Very interested to hear, so let me know what you think. Don't forget to leave a like, comment and subscribe, and I'll check you guys in the next vid. Cheers.